No problem. So let's begin.
Okay.
I ask everyone to turn off the phone, the microphone, okay?
All right. So, good morning, everyone. I would like to thank you all for being here, especially the examining board, Ian Borden and Adriana Sansel, as well as Professor Wagner and everyone who collaborated on this research. I am deeply grateful for your presence. Thank you. Here we address skateboarding as a particular way of producing urban spaces, focus on the qualities of the practice that enable the production of skate territories within cities. We will argue that the political and expressive practice of skateboarders produce these territories while at the same time being washed out by strategies of control over the skateboarder's body. We will analyze the territory of skateboarding as the result of a constant process of territorialization and deterritorialization operated by tactics of spatial appropriation and strategies of spatial domination. And this is the central tension that produces the research problem, the divergence between the intentions of the user who appropriates the city and the dominant power that controls it. Focusing on the city of Goiânia provides a privileged perspective on the issue as it intensifies the contrast between this tension. Distant from the cultural industry of skateboarding, introduced and consolidated in Brazil along the Rio-São Paulo axis, where the capital finds more favorable conditions for its realization, we observe the skateboarding in Brazilian Midwest, disputing space with a conservative countryside culture of Brazilian agribusiness, rooted in the use value of the space. The city's urbanization was planned and built from scratch, and its development strengthened the dominant classes by promoting a spatial segregation through land commodification, catalyzed by an urban plan structured by functions, normatives, and prioritizing automobile circulation, with influences on the radial design of Haussmann with Grand Boulevards, commissioned by Napoleon III to sanitize Paris in the 19th century and reused here to sanitize and modernize the Brazilian Midwest. Regarding this tension, we note that from a broader perspective, we are referring to a problem rooted in the struggle for the right to the city, especially for those who cannot obtain their space according to the rules imposed by the capitalist mode of urban production, in which the economical powers equals or even surpasses the collective power of political democracy, generating strategic expulsions of those who cannot possess their space and catalyzing conflicts over the urban appropriation. It is at this point that our analytical focus is situated on the transgressive practice mobilized by skateboarders against these segregated spaces, framing the central research problem around the strategic responses to these transgressive tactics, especially to the creation of what we will understand as exclusive spaces, at the same time that they can exclude skateboarders from the urban dynamics. To address this problem, it is essential to work with a concept capable of capturing the expressions that articulate power relations in space. So while our approach aligns with the social spatial prediction theory and the right to the city as developed by Henri Lefebvre, our main theoretical axis is grounded in the concept of territory, especially but in Rogerio's Hasberg theory of multi-territoriality, through which we will understand the territory as a result of overlapping power relations and symbolic identitary expressions in the space. To operate the analysis of these dimensions, we use the concepts of strategy and tactic, as in Michel de Certeau, and through concepts of cultural identity and its control, as discussed by Stuart Howe with support of Foucault and Bauman. Always related and not exceeding the territorial prediction scope. The main objective here is to analyze how skateboarders territorialize their practice in the city, allowing us to compare spontaneous territories with the exclusive exclusionary ones, allowing some specific, alongside with some specific objectives that guide us to this understanding, such as analyzing how the notion of skatable space operates within the process of territorialization identifying and examining the social spatial factors that guide skateboarders' preference for territorialization in the streets or skate parks, and also the ones that produces skateboarders' deterritorialization from this different type of space. And finally, to analyze the interdependence between territorial production and identity production in the case of skateboarding. The research method is an ethnographic approach based on direct immersion in the field. It follows José Magnani's proposal of a close-up and from within perspective of territory, combining techniques of participant observation, mapping of the skate territorial network, archival research, and qualitative interviews to compare the procedural production of of these territories over time. However, before entering the field, two preparatory stages are presented. In chapter one, we review the concept of territory, understanding it as a relational prediction, dependent on both relations, power relations, and symbolic and identitary expressions of the subject of who territorializes. This production is structured through territory zones, such as skate parks and appropriated street obstacles, connected by territorial networks, seen as linear from a modern perspective, but analyzed through postmodern nonlinearity, that is, as a set of nodes articulating flows that activate and deactivate territorialization according to individual preferences, as we can see on street skating practice and even in a global mobility through reticular networks, where the displacement of skateboarders itself becomes a form of territorialization. The overlap between territory zones and territory networks, alongside a continuous process of deterritorialization, constitutes what Heisberg defines as a multi-territorial structure. Based on this theoretical foundation, in chapter two, we conduct a state-of-the-art study ranging from historiographical studies of early skate territorializations to those studies that focused on some key territories for the boom of street skating, culminating until a systematic bibliographic review of research in Brazil that used skateboarding as a key word or title, in which we identify 53 dissertations and theses reduced to 28 focused on skate-city relations, and then grouped in authors focused on power relations and expressive identitary relations. The first group, the one who talks about power relations, helps us differentiate the territorialization in skate parks and in the streets. Therefore, we highlight the main positive and negative factors of skate parks, as mentioned and repeated by each author. The second group overcomes this apparent dichotomy by highlighting the plurality of skateboarders' practice, by tensioning these contracts such as leisure versus professionalization, style versus technique, autonomy versus institutionalization, and finally, streets versus skate parks. With this theoretical basis and study cases, we delve into the reality of Goiânia to verify how this multi-territorial production takes place. We identified 15 major skate spaces, meeting points, and selected 5 of them with the highest intensity of appropriation. From the city's first public skate park, number 1, in a socially vulnerable periphery, through 2 self-built spots or DIYs, number 3 and 10, to the city's 2 newest skate parks in more economically affluent areas, number 6 and 15. We draw from a prior data set from our previous research, in which we interviewed over 80 skateboarders, analyzing the lived, perceived, and conceived spaces in these 5 spots. By these first stage interviews, we capture repeated mentions to groups that helped increase activism in territorial production, and therefore they were included in a second phase of interviews for the present study. This scope encompasses the spheres of skateboarders' spatial practice, and each of the groups helps us understand this totality, such as the Frenzy Collective in social cultural action, the Ambiente Skate Shop in cultural economic practice, the Goiânia Skate Association in economic political practice, and the Sarredão Crew in political social practice. The most experienced skaters in these groups recount their first territorializations even before the existence of skate parks in Goiânia. We illustrate this process with excerpts from a few interviews in Portuguese with English subtitles.
Comecei a andar em 1987. Cara, eu morava no Jaó. Minha rua, quando eu ganhei meu skate, era de terra.
Nossa, comecei aqui em Goiânia, em 87. Poxa, cara, no Parque Ateneu, na rua da minha casa, uma rua que só passava, acho que um carro só por vez.
Eu comecei andando na minha quebrada mesmo, Riviera, assim, andando em bairro, né, com os amigos. E depois a gente ia pra rodoviária.
Naquela época, cara, todo mundo se encontrava ali na rodoviária, no estacionamento da rodoviária. Ali era o point.
A gente dava na rua. E Goiânia tinha um lugar onde a gente se encontrava, cara, que depois ele se perdeu, né? Que era a Praça do Trabalhador, ali na frente da rodoviária. Lá era um pico muito bom. Durante os anos 90 inteiro a gente dava muito lá.
Não, cara, a gente pegava o ônibus, chegava aqui no Terminal Isidória, e do Isidória a gente pegava a Rua 90 até chegar na rodoviária. Então a gente ia descendo ali pelo setor sul, a Rua 90, chegava na bacinha, tinha a bacinha que não era bem uma pista, mas era um terreno meio aprofundado assim de concreto. A gente andava ali e depois seguia pelas calçadas, dando o olho.
O ano foi ali 97 para 98. Vinha gente da região, em torno aí do Nova Esperança também. E a galera andava.
Desde o começo a gente anda aqui e tal. E aí, como aqui é Campinas, setor Campinas, veio esse nome de Campinas.
Não sei se a gente chama de pista, mas era um espaço onde tinha obstáculos, que era o mutirama.
Okay, so the cross-referencing of this data from these interviews allows us to map and to analyze the process of deterritorialization from the precarious and non-scalable conditions of peripheral neighborhoods towards the reterritorialization in central spaces, connecting different skateboarders by their shared notion of what a skatable space is, a concept that operates in the skater's imagination even before they act materially upon the space. Moving to the 5 selected spots that still exist to this day, starting with the number 1, Praça da Paz. Rogers, Neri, and Amaro Santos, who led the conquest of Praça da Paz skate park in the late 90s, described that in 1998, there were dozens of skateboarders in the northwest region of the city, practicing in the streets and thereby provoking hatred from business groups whose spaces were being appropriated by skateboarding. At a certain point, SECOM, an educational institution, embraced the practice, allowing skateboarders to store their self-built wooden obstacles on its premises until the moment when local residents set fire to these structures. From this conflict, skateboarders began a process of collective mobilization to demand a dedicated space for practice, culminated in the construction of the first skate park in the state of Goiás in 2002. This process is documented through Amauro's archives, which shows everything from the first improvised appropriation on Second Streets to the inauguration of the skate park and the major events that later took place there. In the case of number 3, the Quadrinha de Campinas, Bruninho and Juninho described that the appropriated space already existed as a smooth surface, multi-sport public court, which was friendly shared with basketball users. After the basketball activities ceased, skateboarders themselves built their own obstacles, sometimes even overnight to avoid police interference. This practice corresponds to what we define as tactics of spatial appropriation, drawing on Michel de Certeau framework, in which tactic is a calculus that cannot rely on a proper space. It's a place that belongs to the other. A tactic insinuates itself in the space of the other fragmentally without fully taking it over, step by step. Or far from the just isolated experiences, these seemingly localized tactics are interconnected to a certain extent. Bruninho's archives reveal connections and practice with Amaro Santos from Praça da Paz, revealing a multi-territorial circulation of skateboarding across these territories. At the DOI of Martin Serere, the tactics of skateboarders such as lobs are catalyzed by institutions like Ambiente Skate Shop, which not only supported the renovation of Martin, but also constructed new obstacles in other surrounding areas such as Bacinia and also Bacião, which was not legally owned spaces, but rather the result of agreements with public authorities that allowed the self-construction and the events on these public spaces. Through these three examples, we observe autonomous territorializations driving solely by skateboarders, process of deterritorialization and reterritorialization supported by public authorities, and reterritorializations involving skateboarders, the state, and private actors. Beyond these fixed territories, we also followed skateboarders through territorializations by movement, that is, through street skating. We mapped the displacements of the interview skateboarders and then followed their sessions, tracing interactions with urban space. Both observation and interview data indicate that while territorialization in skate parks is motivated by their functions as meeting points, their accessibility and eased appropriation, it does not replace street-based territorialization, which represents creativity, overcoming challenges, and a deeper connection to the city. However, this form is more intense and exposed to conflicts, making skateboarders alternate and not only oppose these two types of practice. On the other hand, we observe two skate parks constructed solely by public authorities with no meaningful participations from skateboarder in the process. The contrasts are evident. Although their material quality is often higher, we highlight that skateboarder territorialization does not depend solely on materiality. It's also immaterial, expressive, and symbolic. And these skate parks frequently fail to attract territorialization precisely because they do not engage with this creativity and participatory dimensions of the practice. At the Autódromo, we find a skate park with difficult access, entirely surrounded by high-end gated communities, as seen in red on the map, and large avenues that favor arrival only by private vehicles. Moreover, the park is enclosed by fences with restricted opening hours, behavioral regulations, and private security, constituting a set of panoptic strategies of surveillance and bodily control in the space. At Moreira Skate Park, by contrast, there is no fences, but rather a gentrified environment that transformed the skate park into an instrument of urban spectacle, serving the capital interests of the markets that financed it, to erase the prior appropriation of the site by homeless populations. Moreover, the space is maintained with its corporate colors and branding, which overrides local expressions, and the interventions of skateboarders such as graffiti, and even undermine the very sense of collectivity among skateboarders, which becomes fragmented in the face of the conflicts that arises with non-skater users from different social classes, as well as the additional barriers to the territorialization related to broader socio-economical constraints. Thus, while the territories produced through tactics are ignored or avoided by media and public authorities, it is these new skate parks, spectacularized, sanitized, and controlled, that host the events and attracts the attention of non-skaters, who in turn comes to misunderstand the skateboarding territory as this confined, exclusive, and monotonous skate parks, fostering the false impression that this type of spaces can replace the practice in the streets. But beyond the disputes over meaning, there is also a dispute over investments, which tend to favor skate parks that generates exchange value in the city, while street skateboarding is the one grounded in tactics of appropriation oriented toward use value, is increasingly perceived as an alien to the urban space of Goiânia. In this sense, we observe the emergence of a new strategy of control, which beyond the panoptic instruments of surveillance operating over the territory zones, unfolds through synoptic mechanism. That is, rather than activating control only when the skateboarder is physically present within designated spaces, the synoptic strategy operates through seduction, drawing skateboarders towards spaces of control by cultivating their desire for the spectacle widely circulated in mainstream media through the sanitized skate parks as a stage for major competitions, brands, and sponsorships, flattening the urban experience to a single and monotonous way of practicing skateboarding. By the interviews, we noticed that skaters forged on the streets are indeed resistant to this seduction, and not every skaters like to compete. In fact, they were a minority on the field. But this is exactly what we highlight as part of the problem, because contrary to how they pursue the practice, the flow of capital in private and public policies favor the production of more and more competitive spaces, seducing through the spectacle new generations of skateboarders, investors, and consumers of this type of format. These different types of territorialization produces different cultural identities, even within the same universe of skateboarding. So we observe the marginal skater, the athlete skater, the peripheral gangsta, the punk skater, plurality that can be understood through Stuart Hall notion of the centering of the subject in the ongoing production of the cultural identity, which according to Hall is affected by material conditions as observed on the peripheral context, discourse as expressed by clumpiness, power relations as in strategies and tactics, symbolic desire evident in the competitive spectacle and process of cultural hybridization, such as in the emergence of these athleticized forms of skateboarding. However, we argue that even though they are traversed by different preferences, conditional factors, and control strategies, there is a point that unifies the culture, and it can be represented to the notion of skatable space. While territories is results from action, skatable space operates as a conception that precedes the action on the space. So even if a skater do not enjoy a given space, be it the streets or a skate park, they all can recognize whether that space is skatable or not, regardless of the individual preferences. So this shared conception produces and unites the cultural identity of of skaters through the similarity of feelings and sensations of the body during the appropriation of the space. Based on this mismatch between creative spatial practice and induced spaces, emerges a need for alternative spatial arrangements. While all the investments goes to the spaces that generate exchange value, many expressions of this culture call for spaces of cooperation instead of competition, spaces that promote collectivity, identities, creativity, and above all, just fun instead of pressure, within a system where capital is leading the dominant voices deciding which and how will be the territories of skateboarding. Therefore, we conclude that skateboarding operates within a multi-territorial network where difference between the practice in skate parks and in the streets do not constitute a dichotomy or opposition, but rather a continuous interconnected dynamic. The key was to understand that regardless of the setting, skateboarders act through creative appropriations, socializations, and expressive interventions that produce territories with inseparable cultural identities. to denial, to constrain this dynamic is to risk generating precarious territorializations, or even the exclusionary spaces. In essence, we argue that skateboarding reveals a fundamental contradiction in the capitalist production of urban space, creating spaces not to be used, at least not by the ones who do not fit in their consumption normatives. Within the systems, street skaters are labeled as marginal, while those who contribute to the spectacle and circuits of competition are framed as athletes. Yet both share a common cultural unity in a particular way of perceiving and engaging with space, driven by their pursuit of a playful and embodied experience, largely sustained by the transgression of the normative constraints. And by doing so, it exposes the limits of the dominant urban models and points to a need to develop alternative ways of producing and inhabiting urban space, offering a cue for architects and urbanists to create the openings within these limitations, so that the enjoyment is not reduced merely to another product on the shelf of the urban spectacle. I thank you all for your attention, and I conclude with a quote from Didi Uberman that highlights our method here, that will be criminal and stupid to place fireflies under a spotlight, believing it will be better to observe them, just as there is no point in studying them once they are dead. To know the fireflies, you have to observe them in the middle of the night, even if the night is swept by some fierce spotlights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fellypi. And thank you for respecting the time for the presentation. I invite Professor Ian Borden to do your comments and the questions.
Thank you very much. I've just lost my notes. I'm just going to pull them back up. Great. Thank you very much, Fellypi. Thank you very much for inviting me through your committee to participate in this. And thank you for the dissertation, which I hugely enjoyed reading. And thanks also for your presentation, which I think gave a very clear account of what you've done. I have to say, I think this is a very impressive dissertation. At a master's level, I think this is somewhere around 50 or 60,000 words long, something like that. Not quite sure how many words it is. In my own university, that's considerably larger and more detailed than other master's dissertations, and it's not far off a PhD, a doctoral thesis, so in its scope. So I'm very impressed with what you said. Just to say then some more about what I think this contribution is. I think you have clearly made an original contribution to knowledge in terms of both of the history of skateboarding in Brazil. And I have to say, I didn't know much about the history of skateboarding in Brazil from the 60s and 70s onwards. So thank you for that. I've learned a lot, but also obviously in the contemporary condition. You've also managed to cover very unusually in dissertations, theses on skateboarding, a very wide range of spaces, as you've articulated, from skate parks to DIY to skatable spaces to street spots. But I also enjoy the sense of the multi-scale that's in your work, in that you talk about fireflies right at the end, the very small individual skaters, and then you also go out to the city-wide and even indeed international scale. And I think you've done very well to convey that sense of individual experiences within wider networks. You obviously have a very good use of theoretical concepts from Certeau, from Hasbert, from Lefebvre, from Hall, Foucault, Bauman, and so on. You've combined this with some actually pretty detailed ethnographic research. I was really impressed with the number of interviews that you did and the way that you focus, I think, on the 4 different particular groups. All the way through, you have a very good sense of your methodology and clear research questions. You clearly understand skateboarding history and the other academic work that has been produced on this. And I appreciated the way that you showed how you zoned in on particular theses in this. And it was well presented with really good images and maps and diagrams. So overall, I think it was a really impressive thing. Some questions that it raises. I mean, all academic work raises questions. And you articulate at one point that the central hypothesis of the research is that skateboarding territorializations, they don't just occupy spaces previously defined by urban planning, but they produce new diverse spatialities. And you talk about how they overlay strategies of bodily control and socio-spatial appropriation. And I think one question in this that your work raises is, in the history of skateboarding, how much is it a history of contestation and conflict? And how much is that an essential part of multi-territorial skateboarding? And how much is it also a process of co-design and collaboration and cooperation between skaters and people who they might normally consider they might conflict with? And obviously we've seen in other parts of the world, in places like Malmö in Sweden, where co-design and collaboration and cooperation has been a very major part of what the skaters are doing now. What else would I say? I'm just looking through my notes on this. I think one of the things also is I think for us those of us who engage in the study of skateboarding and the history and history of it, but also its present day reality and its potential future, and our skaters ourselves. And it's quite interesting that many of the academics who work in skateboarding are also skateboarders, is a question of how much are we producing work which is historical, how much are we producing work which is theoretical, how much are we producing work which is analytical, but also how much are we producing work which is actually has a kind of utopian forward-looking sense of where would we like skateboarding to go, and what do we consider its future to be? And you often see this, I think, I work in a school of architecture, and you're very used to seeing students do this in their design work, where in a way they're understanding a contemporary condition, but they're trying to make the world a better place. How much do you do that in written work like this? How much do you try and articulate a future for skateboarding? Other things that I think your work raises which connects to this, which is how do you deal with your own positionality as a skateboarder and a researcher? I think, again, that quote you had at the end about the firefly, you kind of say you have to kind of get in amongst the fireflies in order to understand it. But how do you do that and stop being too hagiographic, too celebratory, too promotional of skateboarding? As an insider, how do you maintain a sense of objectivity? Two other things that I think I would challenge you, maybe when you do more work on this in the future, as you may well do, is to think more about and I guess you do through the different groups, but how do things like gender and sexuality and other social differences, how are they accommodated in these spaces? And how do those sort of different bodily and identity characteristics change people's experiences? And then the other one, I think, is how do different media, magazines, zines, videos, social media, what role do they play in the construction of skateboard territories? So I think that would be my main comments on it. I mean, I also think that one of the things, I think the value of the work that you've done is that you've created a kind of quite a detailed methodology, and it's a framework which could be applied to other places and other around the world. So I think it's a very clear example of where you have not only studied a particular city and set of different skaters, but I could very well imagine people who were looking at other cities, other countries, being interested in this work and thinking, well, I could use this to look at my own place. So yeah, thank you very much. I really enjoyed that work.
Thank you very much, Professor Ian. And now follows Professor Adriana. You can speak.
Thank you, everybody, for the invitation, Wagner and Fellypi. Nice to meet you, Ian. I'm happy to be here again because I was part of the qualifying evaluation of Fellypi. Fellypi, I think you have a very good work. I agree with Ian. It's very complete. The work fulfills its objective of discussing how skateboarders territorialize their practice. It is a substantial and well-structured, serious, and very detailed work. There was a strong, we see that there was a strong dedication between the qualifying stage and the final test, which an effort to address the questions raised at that time and to advance along with the indicated direction we suggested you. The main theoretical chapter on territory is very well done. The literature review is excellent, that articulates various authors and operating with a central author who contributes the main concepts of territory zone and territory network. The articulation between theory and the theme of skateboarding is very well executed also, and is the connection between theory, as is the connection between theory and the cases that you did very well. The empirical section is well integrated with the theoretical part, showing an appropriate application of the concept to the theme, as well as the author's, yours understanding and comment of the discussion. And also we see that was interesting that you did an articulation with the tactical urbanism, where you identified when reviewing my work, and I appreciate this perspective on the topic. You did like a bridge between the Tokyo's experience, and I think it's interesting. And now you presented very well a very good oral and graphic presentation that answers many of the points that I will comment now. But I will do anyway, because and then later I will send it to you because I think it can help to improve the final document you present. I have 3 questions and 4 main critics about the document that I hope will help you to revise it before the final submissions. I will start by the questions. The first one is regarding the selection of cases, including the skate park and the do-it-yourself interventions. In this section of cases, was there no top-down case that does not operate with control strategies that could have been considered? An alternative one, as you showed at the conclusion, was this choice of 2 opposing approaches intentional? Opposed in the sense that you divide it into two different subchapters, or was a gradation among different approaches attempt? It seems that in the city there are top-down initiatives more aligned with the skateboarders' aspirations, which could bring important conclusions about how collaboration between public authorities and organized skateboarders would provide good space for the city. Placing one against the other, the skate parks versus the do-it-yourself interventions in two separate subchapters leaves the analysis without much nuance. It reminded me somewhat of the opposition between street carnival and with the Sambódromo carnival, you know? Both are strong cultural expressions that serve different purposes. And how do you see, the question is, how do you see this issue? This is the first one. The second one, regarding the three categories, appropriation, intervention, and socialization. It was not very clear for me how intervention is understood in this dissertation. What is the difference between appropriation and intervention for you? Does the intervention refer to the skateboarder's intervention in space beyond the performance itself, such as graffiti, music, and do-it-yourself elements? Or would intervention be the construction of the skate park itself? In that case, the order of factors could change, especially when dealing with official or self-built skate parks. In official cases, intervention would come before appropriation, because you always present appropriation, intervention, socialization. I don't know if it's an order or and the order could change. It would be interesting to see how this order of facts impact on the place, right? And the last comment is more punctual, but it called my attention when I read it. Has to do with the appropriation of public space by different groups. A quote you used caught my attention because it contradicts what I understand to be your opinion. The quote is, it was a skateboarder quote. It was a place where homeless people slept. It was nothing, but it was simply perfect. This skateboarder's statement in trying to validate the appropriation by their group ends up excluding other social groups who also appropriate this space. This issue is even criticized in the section discussing control strategies used in skate parks in Guyana, where homeless people were displaced to other places to open space for the skate park, right? So I ask whether you perceive this contradiction. I have 4 critiques and suggestions that are light, but I think that are important. It does not invalidate all the effort you did. I hope you receive this suggestion as a way to improve your work. The first one is the systematization of the discussions and analysis. The dissertation is very long. Ian is right for a dissertation. A master dissertation is very long. Both the discussion of the concept of territory and the discussion of the skateboarding, as well as the analysis of cases in other cities and the analysis of territories in Guyana, they require systematization at the end of each chapter. The long, continuous texts could culminate in tables that systematize what was discussed and summarize the issues that emerge in each session. I think this is very easy for you now that everything is ready. The literature review on skateboarding could present the author's contributions in a systematic way in tables rather than in continuous texts, which lengthens the explanation. The list at the end of the article review, for example, highlighting positive and negative points, was good, but could gain greater readability if presented in table forms, for example. Regarding the 5 analyzed cases, summary sheets could systematize the tactics used and other information, which could then be compiled into a comparative table listing all 5 side by side, for example. So when I was reading, every time I was systematize this, the information is lost, the information is lost. The work of systematization allows for comparisons and analysis, reviews what may not have been previously observed, and serves as a legacy, an important contribution for future scholars on the subject, who may use your work as a reference. To this day, for example, researchers reproduce Arnstein's ladder of participation diagram every time. It's the same image that she systematizes, and every scholars after her use this diagram. So this is very important for you to show up your work. The section focused on interviews is very good, but also very textual, lacking systematization. Here in the presentation, you systematized a lot because you had to present in English and you had to use your material to transmit your ideas very quickly. Some of these diagrams you can include in the dissertation final volume. The second comment is the literature review on territory of skateboarding, chapter 2.4. That here I will be how can I say chata in English? I forgot the word. I will be a little chata, right?
Maybe boring, I know.
Annoying. Okay. This chapter, in my view, presents the greatest problems. The same observation about the lack of systematization applied here. Everything discussed could be summarized in few tables with keywords that could be grouped to allow for categorization. It was not necessary to go into such detail about previous works to justify not selecting them as reference works. You have to detail more that works you selected, not those you would not select. This could be justified if a paragraph explained the criteria to avoid being overly verbose. All times it gives the impression that the works excluded from the discussion lack quality, when in fact they serve other purposes different for your study, you know? So regarding the literature review on skateboarding itself, I see a problem in the tone of the approach. The author's mentions made important contributions to that this work now relies on to bring new contributions. That is knowledge. However, your review focused more on what these works did not do, often because they had different objectives, than on their actual contributions. I suggest revising this section to make it more constructive. At many points, the text reads more like a peer review report than a literature review, bringing many negative critiques and pointing out supposed problems rather than identifying gaps for new contributions. If the texts found are not useful for this work, that they simply should not be used. It is not worthwhile spending pages and pages on what is not relevant to your work, and the tone adopted can be friendly, more friendly, okay? The third and the fourth are more or less the same, but with some differences. The third is the analysis of places from your perspective, the author's perspective. I think the field work lacked more measurements of space, drawings of appropriations, and comparisons. As an architect, you should have made more efforts to draw the things. The plans with annotations about the space are very small on your document, and they are they overlap the images. They are not so clear, and are not very explored. The result of the analysis gives more weight to skateboarders' perspective on space than to that of the actor researcher, you. I know more the place by the interviewers than by you, you know. I think you could explore better as an architect and from your field. When proposing participant observation in the field of architecture and urbanism, there is an expectation of greater interaction between the researcher and the space, which in my view remained weak because there are few elements of this participation. And now here you put in large words that it was important for you, that calls my attention also. And the last one that is very related with the previous is the graphic discourse. The images presented are visually appealing. They're very nice, your images, but they do not fully characterize the skatable spaces. Restricting the graphic discourse to a few maps and many photos is insufficient. For example, timelines are fundamental for understanding the history of skateboarding, both globally and in Goiânia. And you presented here some exercises about that in this oral presentation, but you can incorporate in the document. In general, chronological information gets lost throughout the text if it's not systematized, as I commented before. The work could also make use of more diagrams and interventions on photographs. And here you presented also, this is gated, and you called attention for the gate. You know, there are many resources that you can use to use your abilities or your tools and abilities as an architect. The method for selecting texts used in the skateboarding literature review could also be diagrammed, showing the database, selection criteria, and selected authors. It seemed too much work, but it's not, because some you already have, and others are very simple, like a nice table with some information. And to finish, small comments about form, 2 comments about form. The last quote you read is very nice, but I would not end the work with a quotation. End your work with your own ideas and thoughts. You can put this quotation at the beginning of the conclusion, for example, and then end it more like in a beautiful, in a nice way, using your words. I think it would be better. And I ask you to change the way you quote my work to some fonts, not fonts, so that I can be recognized, because I can't find myself in my fonts way of quoting. But I think it's this. I can send you these written comments so that you can use them if you want, if Wagner thinks that is useful. And I appreciate, and I thank again for the invitation. And congratulations.
Many thanks, Professor Adriana. And now I will let Fellypi. So we know, that said, we now move to a closed deliberation. I will right now. I don't have Ian WhatsApp, so because we used to WhatsApp. I will create another room. Congratulations, Fellypi. You're approved. Now you're a master. Okay. Many thanks, everyone, mainly Professor Adriano, Professor Ian. And on behalf of the committee, I congratulate Fellypi Faria for his dedication, contribution to research in this important, I think that's in this program, the first dissertation on behalf of this team on skateboarding. And now I'm not sure if you want to talk something, final words, Fellypi, but if not, we finish our session.
Just briefly to thank you all for being here. Thank you for kind words, all the points. Thank you to everyone who contributed to this process of the dissertation, the writing, the research, everything. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ian. I hope English was not such a big barrier for this. And
well, your English is fantastic. My profound
thank you.
thanks to all of you for doing this in English, because it's because of me, no doubt, you're doing it in English. So my apologies and my thanks. I'm honoured to be invited. And the best thing I can say, Fellypi, is that I learned so much through reading your dissertation. And that is really, really amazing. You have made a really original contribution. Lots of thoughts of how it could be even better, but yeah, brilliant. Well done. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I hope Ian, Adriana, we can proceed with this discussion on the future, and I wish you all the best. Thank you very much.
Parabéns, Fellypi.
Obrigado.
Obrigada, pessoal, pelo convite. Tchau, tchau.
Obrigado a todos e todas que estão aqui nesse momento. E eu vou encerrar a gravação. Eu finish the recording. And a great week for everyone. See you all.
Bye.
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 Bye, everyone. Bye.